Welcome everyone to Post Crisis Chat. I'm your co-host Randy, and with me is our ever laggy co-host.
You can call me Big Cookie.
All right, Big Cookie, I like it.
If you are a first time viewer, we want to welcome you to this channel because, we always love having new viewers. Please remember to like the video. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Hit that notification bell so that, we're going to let you know when we drop new episodes. We drop them every week.
Absolutely. And it's really such a small thing to do that helps us grow the channel. It really means a lot to us when you like our videos, so please do that. If you're not a first time viewer, welcome back. We're really thankful to have you here.
Exactly. We could not do this without you. This is the point where we got to tell you we will be talking about decades old spoilers in this issue we will be discussing today. Can't complain too much if you haven't read it because I haven't read it much either. I'm just doing it now. And speaking of the issue we will be reading today, it is going to be Saga of the Swamp Thing 35. I got the lovely cover right here. Well, not a lovely cover, but I got the cover right here. It is written by obviously Alan Moore because we're doing his run, art by Stephen Bissette, and of course, inks by John Totlebon.
I like the way you phrased that about the cover, because last issue we had a gorgeous cover from our inker who really should be doing more art. This issue we get a cover that looks like ass. I'm sorry, I don't say very many bad words on the channel, but that cover looks like ass. It's terrible. It looks like someone took poop on the bottom part of the page there, then tried to dress it up the poop like it's Swamp Thing. I will note that we do have the Alan Moore themed eyes on the cover. Eyes are a big thing for Moore, as we've discovered as we discuss this series.
I don't think I would have gotten quite that descriptive with how bad the cover. I just thought it just wasn't one of the better covers.
No, it
I see
literally
what they
looks
were
like a
going
pile.
for. I guess it does. I'm going to let you. All hate comments people can be directed towards Randy. Knock yourselves out.
We get a prologue that's immediately following the last issue's communion between Swamp Thing and Abby. It's noted that paper boys have dumped their papers undelivered near the edge of the swamp. The newspapers are polluting the swamp, and Swamp Thing notes how irrelevant news in the papers is to him. That is a bit of foreshadowing for what's going to be happening throughout the issue, but I'm going to hold off on talking about that foreshadowing until the very end, and we'll get into that more. Abby is sleeping behind Swamp Thing. We switch to a different place where a man in a shadow is talking to someone named Ed. Ed informs the shadow that he is not, in fact, Ed, but he is cold. The man in the shadow says he'll light a fire. We get some more newspapers used as kindling. Newspapers are going to become a theme throughout the issue. They mention that a nuclear power plant, something about a nuclear power plant and toxic waste.
I kind of like how they use the newspapers as a way of putting in the title. It's got Swamp Thing created by Len Wein and Bernie Wrightson. It's also got name of the title of this story arc, the Nuke Face. I kind of like how they incorporated that into the newspapers. I thought that was kind of a clever little thing that they could do artistically. I've seen quite a bit done in the modern comics, but at this point, I don't know how often they were doing that kind of stuff.
I agree. I kind of noticed that whenever I was reading it originally, but I didn't take special note of it. But you're right in saying that it looks really cool the way they kind of did that all together. The title, the nuke face, is kind of like burning. It's starting to burn down onto where it says the nuke face. It looks really
Uh,
good there.
it, it, it reminds me a little bit of if you go back to the Will Eisner Spirit comics and stuff, and how he would always open his first page. You'd have the spirit, and then it would be the title page would be somehow incorporated into something in the background or whatever. It's like he was very good at doing that kind of stuff, and I kind of felt like that's what they were trying to do here. Obviously not to that level, but still kind of pretty cool.
I haven't read much in the way of the spirit, but that is a really cool way to do things. At this point, Ed says his name is Bob, and the man in the shadows seems uncaring. Ed Bob runs out of his drink of choice as the man in the shadows offers Ed Bob some of his drink. Ed Bob drinks some and immediately regrets it. Then we get our first look at Nuke Face, who very obviously has radiation poisoning. Bissette's art here is not great, but it's not the worst thing I've seen from him either. It's pretty good for Bissette doing a face, and especially a scary face.
That's kind of what I liked was the fact it delivered on the creepiness. Like it
Mm.
looks like a very creepy face, but the missing nose, it just that's not a face you'd want to bring home to mother.
And something I just now noticed in looking at this, that hand at the bottom, the fingernail that's cracked and
Oh
coming
yeah.
off, like I'm getting creeped out right now looking at it. It's giving me chills kind of. It's wow. I mean, props for that. He did a good job with the creepiness. At this point
Yeah.
we learn that oh, I'm sorry.
I was gonna say I agree because I know a lot of artists like to study things like that's kind of how you kind of get better as an artist of like studying anatomy, studying like skin textures and things like that. I would be curious to find out where like what did he study, if anything, to capture the creepiness of like the sores, like I said, the fingernail peeling and stuff like that. Because the internet wasn't around at this point. So what were you just going through like pictures of random dead people or something like
I'm
horror
not
movies?
sure.
Like that kind of makes you wonder a little bit, right?
It really does. I am getting more and more creeped out by that. So I'm, at the very least, changing the page and not focusing on that fingernail anymore. At this point, we learn these two are in Bloomsville, Pennsylvania. There was an explosion at the Lombard coal mine in '68 that is still burning at this time the story is taking place. This is actually based on real world events where a coal mine started burning in 1962. The real life town that's next to that coal mine was abandoned, and that fire is still going to this day.
Oh yeah, that story's inspired a lot of things. I mean, if we got any gamers that are viewers of ours, obviously the first thing that's going to pop to mind is Silent Hill. That's another one that's kind of took, I think, inspiration upon that story and stuff. It's a very commonly used inspirational event in history.
Hmm. I was not that familiar with it in other places, but it makes sense. So we cut to Wallace and his girlfriend Treasure. Treasure is worried Wallace is still thinking about, quote, that awful trouble that wasn't Wallace's fault. Wallace was an employee of the nuclear plant and is happy that it is shut down. He calls the plant a dump. And apparently, the power plant was dumping nuclear waste in places that were supposedly safe. After the dumping started happening, homeless people in the area started vanishing. Treasure says again Wallace shouldn't blame himself for what happened and mentions that one of the men who vanished was, quote, out on a bender with nuke face. She questions what that means, and Wallace avoids the topic.
That's kind of interesting that it kind of feels like again foreshadowing for things that are to come later in this issue. And then this is just like a side note, doesn't really have much to do with the issue, but I want to point out two things. One, I love the name Treasure. I think that is a great name for a character. In fact, if I ever have a child, I might have to consider the name Treasure at this point. And then, am I the only one who, upon hearing them dumping the nuclear waste in like a terrible way, am I the only one that had flashbacks to The Simpsons with Mr. Burns and Smithers trying to hide the nuclear waste throughout the town of Springfield? And just like that sneaky way that they were doing it, like sticking the drums in trees that eventually become like mutant trees with tentacles. And that's just what was going through my mind as I was reading this.
I haven't watched The Simpsons in probably 30 years, so I don't recall that, but I can see why your mind went there. So at this point, we cut back to Nukeface, who's mentioning that he was at the coal mine before it started burning. He says he saw nuclear waste being dumped in the overflow pits of the mine. Meanwhile, Ed Bob seems to be going through some excruciating pain. Ed Bob pulls one of his own teeth out. The look of horror on his face was very well executed by Bissette, and honestly creeped me out a lot. The whole pulling your own tooth thing out. I remember when I was a kid and my baby teeth were falling out. I remember that feeling of what that felt like, and whew, yeah, no.
You think that's fun? I've been living with a broken wisdom tooth for just about a year now, and it's slowly started to break apart more and more over that year. That's an even creepier feeling.
Oof, I can't imagine. Bob mentions everything he is seeing looks blue. Bob is going through some interesting stuff. Nukeface tells Ed Bob that inspectors came out to the mine where Nukeface was living. The first inspector's name was Ed. Coincidence, I'm sure. And at this point, the company poured a bunch of concrete on the area where they'd been dumping the toxic waste. Nukeface laments that they covered his stash in concrete. Hmm.
A little ominous as to like, okay, so what do you mean by stash?
Mm-hmm.
Hmm. I think we all have an idea as to what's happening here.
A little
And
bit.
also, can I just point out also the fact that, like that 1980s mentality for corporate America of like, oh, you know what? Instead of cleaning it up, let's just throw some cement over it. That'll take care of the whole problem.
Oh, absolutely. And then, you know what? If it's a problem here, why don't we just move it to Louisiana instead? And Nukeface actually says that they are moving the dump down to Louisiana, letting us know that Nukeface is currently near Swamp Thing's home. Ed Bob has died at this point.
And to me, the way that they kind of drew Ed Bob dying is just you were talking about how creepy it was when he saw him pulling the tooth out and stuff like that. The dead Ed Bob to me is what creeped me out. Like it looks like a very painful death.
It does. It does. But I'll be honest, that part didn't bother me as much as the tooth. I don't know. Something with me and the way my head works. Dead Ed Bob? That's fine. No big deal. Yeah, excruciating pain. Yeah, okay. It's a comic book. It's not real. But that tooth, man.
So, but repressed psychological trauma just coming back right there.
Apparently. Then we get back to Swamp Thing, and he mentions he is walking through someone else's dream. He doesn't know where he is, but the art shows that he's in Bloomsville, where the fire started and the nuclear waste is being dumped. Swamp Thing is disgusted by the toxic waste that he sees dumped here. He can tell, based on the soil, animals, and other natural things around him, that something terrible has happened here. He calls this place Death Town in big, bold letters. He is very sad and upset that this area is being destroyed like that. And that's a little peek into Swamp Thing's flowers. He's got that connection with the earth and the animals and the soil and all the natural things around him.
I always thought it was kind of interesting that the connection to the animals, because like when you picture like the green and such, I just always assumed the green was just plants. But it's like they also kind of say that there's a connection to the animals and too. I always thought that was more the red,
I
which I
don't
don't
think
know if we ever touch. Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know if we touch on that in this run, the swamp thing.
was the red established at this point? I'm not sure that it was.
I don't recall if it was because Arcane felt like it was more the black than it was the red. So I don't know. If you guys know more about the color spectrum for this stuff, I would be curious to find out because is there also a blue for like the ocean or the sky? I mean, where exactly do we go with these different color elements?
I did a quick search. This is the internet, so it could be wrong. And if it's wrong, please let us know in the comments. The red made its debut in Animal Man Volume 2, Number 1, October 1988. And we are still, I believe, a year or two away from 1988. So the red, at least according to my 10-second Google search, has not been established yet.
Okay, so that's something that will come in later then. Red, that was like more like living creatures like mammals and things like that. That's what I always assumed. I kind of wonder, was he establishing this? Was he kind of setting up for all that happened?
Perhaps. I'm going to do a quick side note here. And it came up in the last episode too, talking about Vertigo Comics. I just this week watched a documentary on Vertigo Comics on YouTube. And it's really interesting that essentially Vertigo Comics was a lot of writers from the United Kingdom coming and doing stuff here in the United States. You mentioned Neil Gaiman. Of course, we've got Alan Moore. We've got Grant Morrison. They came over and started doing comics. And this is what the Vertigo line looked like at the beginning. And you can see how some of those writers who had probably worked with each other before are starting to work with each other again. And they're kind of playing off each other like the green and the red. So maybe Morrison and Moore had some conversations that established that. I don't know. I'm just completely speculating here.
That would be interesting if it was. And I mean, another side note, I love early Vertigo because I mean, like I like later Vertigo, but the early Vertigo was always fun to me because it took characters it felt like that were not very popular within the DC universe, and then they're going in a more mature line, like Sandman Mystery Theater. It's like that's a character that just kind of got swept to the side in the golden age. And that run I've been reading off and on over the years, fantastic. I absolutely love Sandman Mystery Theater.
Yeah, and you actually mentioned that last episode too, and I forgot to bring it up. But that's exactly what they did. They took old and forgotten characters, brought them into the current Vertigo universe, and established them in new and interesting ways without really any continuity from before. And I think it was actually a really clever way that people who maybe wanted to own their own work to be able to create new characters, but not really worry about having to lose their creation because they were basically just taking what they wanted as their new character and slapping it on an existing character without any other continuity.
Exactly. It worked beautifully. Like you had some great early books coming out of early Vertigo. Some like stuff I'm just now discovering because at the time it came out, I was a kid and I was just too dumb to understand reading these great books.
Absolutely. And we're going to be doing some of those books as the show goes on. But let's get back to Swamp Thing. Swamp Thing wakes up. He's happy he's back in the swamp, and he can't seem to shake this dream. We do get some newspaper headlines from the newspapers that drifted into the swamp about easing toxic waste worries, further indicating that toxic waste will be dumped near or in the swamp. We cut back to Nukeface, who is still drinking the toxic sludge that killed Ed Bob. He continues to carry on a conversation as if Ed Bob were still alive. Nukeface opines about how awesome nuclear energy is and how much renewable energy sucks. He seems to kind of have strong feelings about this.
No, it's kind of interesting because I mean, I didn't really pick up on it until you just brought it up. It's like that's one of the things Moore is really good at doing in this run is touching on some social issues in a very entertaining way, in a way that's it kind of feels I don't want to say fresh, but it kind of feels almost ahead of its time, I guess you would say.
I was just about to say, I think the word that comes to mind when I think about it is timeless. Because here we are 40 years later, and we are dealing with the same problems regarding our energy use. We should be using more renewables so that, there's still a planet left, but we continue to rely on things that are not good for the planet. Like I said, it's timeless. They were dealing with the same crap 40 years ago that we're dealing with today.
Definitely. That's actually the perfect way to put it. At least there's not as much war with nuclear waste as there used to be in the 80s. Seems like we've kind of got like more like, newer worries, but it definitely does translate to today.
I will disagree with that because there is ongoing debate and pressure from the federal government to ship nuclear waste to a place called Yucca Mountain here in Nevada.
Hmm.
The government keeps wanting to send the waste out to Yucca Mountain, which is out in the middle of nowhere, and Nevada keeps saying no, we don't want it. And it's been this big fight for years. So we're literally going through the same thing that they were 40 years ago today in our state.
Oh, interesting. I don't hear about it as much, so that's probably why I wasn't thinking about it. Either way, it's still very relevant, and that's the sign of a good story that you're able to read it, watch it, whatever, and it still holds some meaning to a modern audience.
Absolutely. Moore is really, really good at that, except when I read Watchmen. But I digress. Next, we cut to two workers who are, in fact, dumping toxic waste in the swamp. They mention a nerd named Monroe, spoiler alert, that is Wallace, who will be in town tomorrow, who is, quote, bringing his old lady with him. In fact, in the very next panel, they name drop Treasure.
I want to say, don't think it's here. Okay, never mind. I was gonna want to say they said something about, oh yeah, they call her the little fat broad. And I thought that was hilarious that they call her the little fat broad because Bissette did not draw her as thick at all. And as audience may come to know at some point, I do have a weakness for the thick ladies. And I would have noticed Treasure did not look thick. So I don't know why they called her fat.
There was one panel where Treasure was drawn with a double chin. If you want to go back to page 7, it's the bottom left panel. You can see, and you know what? The panel above it, she does look just a little wider than Wallace does. But
Okay, I can see it now. I can see it now. It just, I think it, for some reason, I wasn't picking up on it, but now that I'm looking, I can kind of see it.
yeah, not that
Okay.
important, but it is, in this case, Bissett was consistent at least. Swamp Thing stands at the edge of the swamp, watching the toxic waste sink into the swamp. We cut back to Nukeface and Ed Bob. Nukeface is complaining how things in the swamp don't burn long enough. Everything is wet. After talking some more, Nukeface bids Ed Bob goodbye, and we get a newspaper clipping about a French cargo ship carrying uranium that sunk off the coast of Belgium. Once again, Alan Moore interjecting those social issues. We find Nukeface walking through the swamp, and he locates the place where the workers dumped the toxic waste. Nukeface seems to have a sixth sense about where toxic waste is. He understands that it's buried, quote, under the mud of the swamp. He starts to dig it up as Swamp Thing approaches in the background. Swamp Thing comes up and asks Nukeface, what are you? Nukeface replies, I'm an American citizen. Then he goes on to mistake Swamp Thing for Ed Bob. Nukeface touches Swamp Thing and leaves a burning handprint on Swamp Thing's chest. Swamp Thing screams and falls over. I don't think since Swamp Thing got blown up back at the beginning of the run that we've seen Swamp Thing injured like this.
Yeah, pretty sure that since Arcane and all that stuff and the demon and all those things, I don't recall ever seeing him like be that threatened. So this is his first kind of major villain that's a danger to him.
Nukeface goes to check on Swamp Thing, touches him, and burns Swamp Thing. Once again, Swamp Thing screams in pain, which again, I don't think we've ever even seen him do that. Nukeface, mistaking Swamp Thing for Ed Bob, tries to force toxic waste down Swamp Thing's throat. Some of it does go inside of Swamp Thing's mouth and burns him even further. Swamp Thing is laying on the ground, seemingly out of it, with toxic waste burning a hole in his stomach. Can you believe people had to wait a whole month to find out what happens next? I mean, that cliffhanger, my
Um,
my gosh.
at this point, it's like, if I've been in comics for so long that I'm very used to that kind of stuff happening. Like more recently with modern comics, I tend to wait for a run to be done before I read it because it can drive you crazy sometimes.
Yeah, no doubt.
But it's like, I think I don't think people, I'm going to assume people weren't that bothered by it.
Well, thankfully, we only have to wait a week to see what's going to happen next. Overall, I give this issue a 3.75 endlessly burning coal mines. As usual, the art was rushed and not great in some places, but overall, it wasn't terrible. It was honestly on the better end of the scale for Bissette. And I also want to draw attention to, especially on that last page, the close up of Nuke Face's face and how damaged and messed up he looks there. Because I'm going to give a little preview for the next issue. Bissette forgets that Nuke Face looks like that and draws his face as pretty plain next issue. So, anyway, what did you think of the issue?
Okay, well, thank you for the spoiler on that because now I'm not looking forward to the next issue even more. I I'm gonna give it probably 3. It wasn't It was my favorite. I'm interested in Nuke Face as I don't even want to call him a villain because I don't feel like he's a villain. He's a more just kind of misfortunate victim who happens to be at odds with Swamp Thing, which seems to be a recurring theme aside from Arcane.
He's not
So,
even at odds
but
on purpose. It's
yeah, he's down on his luck. I'm a homeless man who just got addicted to nuclear waste. It can happen to anybody, really. I don't know. I'm not like looking forward to where it's going for some reason. This story arc is not at the top of my list so far. We'll see how it concludes. We'll see. Maybe he can pull it together.
so the next issue is really interesting because of the way it's told. I'm just going to leave you with that. I'm not going to say anything else, but pay attention to the style of storytelling as you're reading it because that is, in my opinion, what makes the issue really interesting. Anyway, don't want to give too much more away. It is getting late, and at this point, we've reached the end of the issue. So I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We are really glad you're here with us watching. We do this for the love of the comics medium.
Yes, and please join us on our Patreon where we have our post-crisis chat book club for our members. We let our Patreons get their say on the book, and once we start getting some comments, we're going to read those on the channel once we record.
Also, don't forget to check out the description for links to our Amazon affiliate page. You can pick up the book we're reading tonight in various formats. You can get the individual trade paperback. You can get the big box set of trade paperbacks, which is a really economically efficient way to get those books. They're like less than $8 a piece when you buy that giant box. You can get the absolute editions if for some reason you want to see Bissette's art in a bigger format. I'm not one to judge. You do you. But if you click the Amazon affiliate link to make the purchase, a little bit of that purchase comes back to the channel and it doesn't cost you anything extra. So it's a really great way that you can support the channel by purchasing something you already wanted.
Yes, and also, I mentioned it earlier, but I'm going to drop it again. If you can't get enough of us, you can always follow us on Blue Sky. The link is in the description below. On there, we will be announcing when we post new episodes, and we would absolutely love it if you could like this video, give us a subscribe, and comment as soon as we drop these videos because that's really going to help the channel grow, and we appreciate that so much.
Lastly, I want to give a huge, big, giant shout out to our editor, Nacho King.
Yes, we could not do this without you, Nacho Daddy.
Yes, you're the best. Now, Cookie has suggested closing phrase for the video. We're going to test it out. I'm going to let him debut it for you.
All right, folks, thanks for tuning in. And remember, may your fruit hang low and may your jungle always be trimmed.
Absolutely. And let us know what you think about the closing phrase. Have a good night, everyone.